It looks like we got Joshua on the line now. Joshua, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are you guys today?
Oh, we're doing great. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Yes, of course.
So,
Justin, just a brief correction. I'm no longer part of the plant pathology department. I am a member of agronomy and plant genetics. Just so everyone knows, I live in the plant world.
all right.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
Great.
So, I want to know a little backstory about you, Josh. How did you, have you always wanted to get into the genetics with plants and breeding a different variety, or how did you get to where you're at today?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have. I came to hops late in life or later in life. When I came back to school, I thought it would be super interesting to do something that no one else has really worked on before. And there was a group who'd started to do some work on hops, and I said, hey, hops sound like they're pretty cool. They're used in beer. And the program was just beginning, so I thought I'd take a moment to just kind of do some more research and see how I might be able to contribute best moving forward. And so I started working with a couple of researchers, familiarizing myself with the crop and kind of what was needed by industry members, and that has slowly over time snowballed into where I am today.
So what did they tell you when you asked industry members? What was their biggest need for hops? We need it in beer, but what did the actual industry tell you?
Yeah, so most of our industry members did not originally come to producing hops with an ag background. So a lot of them were just becoming familiar with the crop itself, as well as learning how to grow hops, which requires a lot of specialized equipment, specialized infrastructure. It's not for the faint of heart. So they really wanted to learn about what various management options were available to them first. Simultaneously, many of these growers are also competing in the marketplace where they don't have a lot of varieties available to them to make it necessarily, not that it's not profitable, but they're competing with people who can grow it at commodity prices. So they're interested in, identifying new varieties that make themselves more competitive in the marketplace and therefore more profitable for growing hops in this area.
Mhm. And where are the bulk of hops grown, and why not in our area? Like, what's the difference from where they are grown to the climate that we have right now that makes it more difficult for those hops to thrive here?
Right. So in the U.S., the 98% of hops are grown in the Pacific Northwest. So that is the tri-state region of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And there in the Pacific Northwest, the climate is generally much more moderate, more arid, especially in Washington. In Oregon, especially on the coast, it's not dissimilar from our own climate. They mostly deal with issues like powdery mildew and downy mildew, but they grow a lot of different varieties there. And some of those are public varieties, which everyone and anyone can grow, and some are proprietary varieties, which only certain people who have access to that material can grow. Here in Minnesota, we have a much shorter growing season, and we deal often, when we're not in the drought year, we deal with weekly, bi-weekly rain events, which is especially conducive to diseases like downy mildew. As well, we have a growing issue with powdery mildew here in kind of the upper Midwest region.
And so, Josh, how long have you been working on, I guess, basically improving the hops product, and how close are you to, I guess, launching a new way to grow hops, and how that will be helpful up here in the Northern Plains?
Yeah, so I've been working in hops since 2013 when I came to the University of Minnesota. And I have, over time, been slowly working towards trying to help develop a new hop variety or series of hop varieties that are more suited to our climate, our conditions, to make it more profitable for hop growers in our area. And I would say we're probably within 1 to 2 years of potentially releasing new varieties of hops that will achieve those goals.
And how would that affect would that affect pricing of the beer locally, or how would that affect our area?
I don't know that it would necessarily affect pricing of the beer per se. I do think it potentially offers a premium to brewers to be able to utilize hops that no one else except for our growers in the upper Midwest to be able to grow and therefore deliver to those brewers. So maybe there's the potential for a small increase in the cost of beer for maybe those beers that are using those hops, but I think already there's a premium on locally grown varieties just because there's an increase in the cost of production for our smaller growers. And so I think brewers realize the benefit of not only having locally sourced hops, but locally sourced and locally developed varieties as well. So, and I don't know that they're necessarily interested in passing on that premium to their consumers, who are more than happy to come and listen to the story of Farmer Joe down the road, who's able to grow these hops and bring them within a very short span or a short window of time to their brewery so that they can use them in, almost immediately.
And what is the longevity of the freshness of these hops? And I'm trying to go along the lines of, you're trying to introduce this new variety of hops that will thrive up in our climate, so that way it's more readily available throughout our local area, versus what we're doing right now, and that would be importing these hops from the Pacific Northwest. How long does that distribution take to get from the Pacific Northwest into our area? And is there a sacrifice in the quality of that hop that, it just doesn't do very well 2 or 3 days after you pick it? What's that life or the quality of that product look like over that time frame?
Yeah, so if a brewer is utilizing fresh hops, that would be hops that have just recently been harvested and haven't been dried. Really, the longevity of that harvest is going to be within a very short span of time. You're going to want to use those definitely within, say, a 24 to 48 hour period. Really, you're hoping that within 6 to 8 hours that you get those fresh or wet hops. Another way that hops are utilized much more broadly in the marketplace is dried and pelletized products. So, and that's where some of the specialized infrastructure comes into play, because you have to have the facilities necessary to dry the product, to pelletize the product, and then to store or refrigerate the product. And the lifespan of those those dried and refrigerated hops is definitely much longer. And we still have previous crop years of surplus available at this point. But I definitely think a way for our growers to carve out a much larger niche in the specialty crop hop industry is by being able to grow locally developed varieties.
Oh, I would agree as well. And if you have a question for Josh, feel free to reach out to us at 701-293-9000. We'll get you all connected to answer or to ask that question. Again, that phone number is 701-293-9000. After bottom of the hour here, we're going to rejoin our conversation with Joshua, talking about hops. And I'm not exactly sure how they're grown, how they're harvested. There's a lot of questions we still have, so we got plenty more. Josh, yes. If you please.
So, Joshua, let's just go to the real basic things here. Does one plant hops in their backyard if they're brewing their own beer at home? Is this more of a commercial focus that you're doing? Are they live plants? Are they seed? Get us started. What happens in the spring till I get it to my glass of beer?
Yeah, so a hop yard, in the process of getting established, people are going to propagate asexually. So all cascade plants originated from, say, rhizomes or softwood cuttings, similar to how you would propagate grapes. And those would get planted out in the spring, and slowly, you would have a trellis that has maybe previously been constructed. You would train the plants to grow up the trellis after providing some twine for them to grow up. And then much like other agricultural crops, you'd go out and you'd work on scouting and managing diseases or pests that might exist until eventually the plant begins to flower and produce those nice large cones that we're after that will eventually make it into the beer. And then when they're ready to be harvested, which is usually determined based on percentage moisture content, they would get cut down and brought to some sort of picker. They would get picked right off the plants and then dried down and pelletized and turned into a usable product for a brewer. The useful thing here is that hops are perennial, so they will come back year after year unless you encounter significant issues with buildup of disease over time, which is always a concern for any cropping system.
You said that they use a trellis. Are they like a vine?
Technically, they're vine, not a vine. So a vine has a tendril that wraps it to its support. Vines have little hooked hairs that allow them to anchor themselves to whatever the support is being used. So in this case, they use coconut fiber built into large twine that is restrung every year. So a grape trellis is permanent, but all of the above ground biomass, all of that green leafy material is harvested and cut down every year for hops.
All right, let's say that we're 1, 2, maybe 3 years down the road and you've successfully launched this new variety of hop that's more resilient to our climate up here with the humidity, the disease resistance. How difficult would that be for, say, Bridget or I, because we're avid gardeners, if we wanted to plant something like this, a small little crop so that way we could make some home brew? How difficult would something like that be for us?
It really depends on how the University of Minnesota will decide to release a potential hop variety. It could choose to release it as a publicly available variety, and therefore there are no sort of restrictions on who can grow it, and that might be the easiest way. There are also, we could take after a kind of a grape or apple breeding variety release scenario where we license propagators who, pay some fee for propagating and maintaining a license, maintaining plant stock, but then that fee is then passed on to the person purchasing the plant. So you might charge $1 or $2 per plant that's purchased, but then that person can grow those plants without issue. And it's just a way to recoup costs related to the development process of new varieties. It just kind of depends. But even for backyard growers, right, you could walk into licensed nurseries and go pick up an Itasca grape or a different grape variety, and the only additional cost is that you're paying an extra $1 or $2 relative to other varieties.
Well, now, if we're going to raise these in our backyard, Justin, I'm wondering how labor intensive it is to work with hops, because then we're going to need Dean to be our labor.
Yes.
For the hops we're raising.
Right.
Josh,
yeah, it is relatively labor intensive, right? I mean, every year you're going out restringing the crop. It requires scaffolding equipment on your tractor to go through and essentially string maybe 1,800 different twines on an acre.
You're gonna be busy, Dean.
Yeah, sounds like it.
No more gym.
Little side hustle.
What's the yield look like on these crops? I mean, do you get a lot of hops off one plant, or you just need acres of these to get a decent yield for even just outside of personal use, but for commercial production? Right.
So I will say this, it depends. It definitely varies based on the variety. Some of the lower yielding noble European hops that people might use to flavor and provide aroma to beer tend to yield somewhere between 6 to say 1,200 pounds of dried hops per acre. Higher yielding, oftentimes the bittering varieties, the ones that are used predominantly to bring across bitterness in beer, that yield can fluctuate, again, depending on the variety, between 1,200 and 2,500 pounds of dried hops per acre.
Oh, you said bitter beer. I'm just hung up on bitter beer face. I'll look forward to seeing yours all later.
I mean, I don't mind a bitter beer,
I do.
a sour beer. Those are good.
So it definitely depends, some. That's why there's a command for different prices in the marketplace. A lot of that is driven by how much is available and how much can be produced. A small craft brewery might only use 1,500 pounds of hops in a given year, and that 1,500 pounds may be composed of a handful of varieties or a great diversity of varieties. It just depends.
And Josh, explain real quickly. We've got about 2 minutes or so. The trial and error process of trying to develop a new hop. How do you know, like, all right, man, that didn't work. Let's alter this a little bit. Let's alter this a little bit. How do you know when, bingo, we've finally got it? And obviously, you said it'd be a couple years, but what's the trial and error process about going through this to try and develop a new variety of hop?
Yeah, so I think, developing new hop requires the input of multiple different parties, right? I mean, there's me as a breeder / geneticist who's has this kind of idea in my mind about what I think would be a really cool variety. But then, realistically, there's what the grower needs in order to be able to grow it profitably, sustainably. But then ultimately, you need to be able to market and sell that to the brewer. And the brewer is kind of the end-all be-all for determining how well they can utilize that variety in the beer recipes that they're making. They have to want to like it, but in order to get it into the hands of the brewer, you need to be able to cultivate it at a large enough scale so that they can begin to test it and experiment with it as well. So oftentimes, we might select a handful of plants over the course of multiple years and only have 10, 15, 20 plants trialed at any given location, but that's sufficient in terms of being able to get enough hops into the hands of brewers to then start describing the sensory aspects of it, or getting sufficient chemistry data so that we can deliver that information to brewers so they know how they can best utilize that variety in the brew house. And then, of course, it has to make good beer.
That's important.
Bottom line.
Bottom line is the good beer. Well, Joshua, I want to really thank you for kind of almost last minute deciding to jump on with us and talk all about this and the work that you're doing. I find it very interesting, and so does Dean and Bridget. And I know a handful of our listeners are sending in a few comments saying that it's just been a joy to listen to you talk about this work that you're doing. So thank you very much for joining us on Weather and Ag in Focus. Before we let you go, is there anywhere you'd like to plug where people can get more information or maybe follow you on the work that you're doing or anything like that?
Yeah, if people want to, by all means, I see my Twitter address at the bottom of the video, so feel free to follow me or visit the Muehlbauer Lab website at the University of Minnesota in the Department of Agronomy and Plant Genetics webpage. You can see and learn more about the work that I'm doing. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to my awesome hosts here today, and they can pass along any information or requests that you guys might have.
Oh, yes, we will.
Thanks to all three for finding a way to help me work out these technical difficulties as we sit here and chat today.
We have a crack IT team. Thank you.